On June 19th, ESSIE's ID Committee published a collective statement, first condemning the brutal murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Rayshard Brooks, and then, with additional faculty and support, committed ESSIE to undertake several forward-thinking initiatives to cultivate a safe and anti-racist environment in the school. ESSIE's Idea Committee has since grown to include more faculty and staff and now seeks to add students. Today's event is the first of many we will host as promoted by the Idea Committee. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting an open conversation between faculty, students, and staff on the values and ethics of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in engineering. Today, we will hear from a distinguished UF Law professor. But before we get to any introductions and the presentation, I will say, we would not be here today working to cultivate an anti-racist environment at ESSIE were it not for the leadership of Dr. Cami Abernathy, Dean of the Herbert Wertheim College of Engineering. I've known Cami, the Dean, for almost 12 years, and she always championed inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Dean Abernathy, would you please honor us with a few words?
Thank you, Kirk. First of all, I want to say congratulations and thank you to the faculty, the students, and the leadership of ESSIE for creating this outstanding event. And I also particularly want to thank David Kaplan and David Pravat for being leaders among that initiative. This is undoubtedly, this issue of systemic anti-Black racism is not only a tremendous threat to our country, it is a threat to our profession. As we have said repeatedly over the last decade, in order for true innovation to occur, we must have a diverse and inclusive workplace. We aspire to be an innovative College of Engineering that requires us to be inclusive and diverse. And again, I am so proud of the efforts of the faculty in ESSIE at embracing this initiative and helping us to begin to move toward a more equitable, more inclusive environment. I particularly want to thank Professor Jacobs for being here to speak with us today. I'm looking forward to hearing her comments, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue that this series of events is going to stimulate among our colleagues and our students. I believe it's within our power to be a leader among engineering colleges in the country in achieving a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And I'm very proud to be a colleague of all of you who have done so much to try to move this initiative forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Hatfield, and I just want to say again, congratulations and thank you so much for taking on this really important initiative.
Thank you very much, Cami. And now I will abdicate control to David Pravat.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'll be the moderator along with Dave Kaplan for this event. You know, why are we doing this? Why do we want to do this engagement right now? This is something that I thought about, but unusual times require unusual solutions. And we are in a place where everything is online and we're separated from each other, but Zoom gives us this ability to reach out and touch each other. ESSIE, our staff and faculty, is representative of the community we want to be, and we're getting there. Our faculty is diverse, our research is diverse and practical as it affects society. Today, we want to acknowledge the support that we have from the staff in ESSIE in all ways, and we will be inviting the staff to our classes next week to share with our students. And coming to our students, this is our mission. We, the person who signs our checks, is University of Florida. We all belong to that 70,000 strong grouping. Our mission is to enable our students to lead and influence the next generation. How they will be able to do that depends on what we do. To shape out their future, they must understand their past. And that's what we're doing here today. So with that, I invite Professor Michelle Jacobs of the law school to discuss something very important to us as engineers. I am a ESSIE fellow. Ethics and values is something that we subscribe to. And Professor Jacobs will talk about the engineer's role in the fight against anti-Black structural racism. Professor Jacobs.
Well, thank you for inviting me to open ESSIE's inaugural series, Values and Ethics of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Idea in Engineering. Those are a lot of words, but they're strong words and they're important words. And I like the fact that their acronym captures the emotion behind the process of creating something new, trying something new and different to see if you can address change. So with that, I'll get started. We're living in one of the rare moments in American history where the work we do now has the potential to have monumental significance in shaping what our country will look like in the years ahead. Over the past 6 months, we've all been in the crosshairs of two monumental currents, the COVID-19 pandemic and the reawakening of the American conscience on the issues of racism and social inequality. In many ways, the two currents combine to highlight both anti-Black racism as well as the multi-layered nature of social inequality in our country. COVID-19 laid out as starkly as no report or study ever could the depth of the racial inequalities in healthcare and social safety nets and employment protection and in government malfeasance towards the poor, towards all communities and towards all communities of color. I don't know if our nation would have been as moved as it was by the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor last spring and the seemingly weekly ongoing killing and maiming of Black people by the police if we hadn't all been trapped in our homes due to quarantine measures and forced to watch the media play Floyd's execution over and over and over. But there's no denying that it was hard for the American public to turn a blind eye to the 8 minutes and 46-second ordeal George Floyd experienced as Officer Derek Chauvin, acting as judge, jury, and executioner, squeezed the life out of him on a street in Minneapolis. People of all ages and races became galvanized and entered into the streets to exercise one of our most cherished rights under our Constitution, the right to petition the government for redress through the use of free speech. And all of a sudden, hashtag Black Lives Matters began to trend in a positive way for a change, because usually when it's trending, it's not trending in a positive way. Expressions of performative support for equality and for the lives of Black people poured in from many corporate entities. Although interestingly enough, these same corporate entities who were expressing support also actively enforce policies that are responsible for the death and oppression in the very same communities now that they now claim to support. Our own institution, as you know, the University of Florida, issued one of those performative support statements. Now, I'm gonna explain why I use the word performative, because in my view, the statements were meant to give public relations coverage and to make it appear as if these corporations, and perhaps even the university, actually care about the lives of Black students, its Black faculty, or the lives of the Black people in the community that surround UF. It's performative because in my mind, I have a real question about whether the university intends to undertake any substantive action to make their words meaningful. As some of you know, this is my 28th year. I'm starting my 28th year of teaching at UF. I started here when the Southern segregationists still ran the university, and particularly the College of Law. So I know for a fact that UF has a poor track record when it comes to making their word good on matters of racial equality. So too, your school, the Engineering School of Sustainable Infrastructure and Environment, ESSIE, has also made a commitment to anti-racism and inclusion, and I've read your statement. It's strong and it's powerful. I hope that your words will not be performative, right? That you will take seriously the commitment that the words represent and work hard to show by deed that there is something concrete and something of substance behind your words of commitment. Ultimately, we are all measured by what we do, not what we say. And I think you're off to a great start on that. And I look forward to following your progress on complying with your commitment to create an anti-racist environment there at ESSIE. I'm here to talk to you today, those of you who are my academic colleagues and those of you who are engineering students as well. In the first instance, I want to thank all of the faculty who recently supported me in my struggle to be able to teach my classes at the law school. It was only through your willingness that I was stunned, actually, at the willingness of faculty across campus and my fantastic students who organized a wonderful campaign in support of their right to have me teach and teach them this semester, even if it is online. So my goal now is to thank you for that and to help you envision how you in your field can participate in the fight for social justice, how you can be an anti-racist engineer, professor, student, or activist if you want to be. You'll notice that in my title of the talk, I have used the words anti-Black structural racism. I want it to be clear that I'm not talking about diversity, and I do not use the word inclusion. As an institution, UF uses those two words quite frequently, and we certainly use them at the law school. I won't try to dissuade anyone from using them. The words have value in and of themselves. But having a group that's diverse or inclusive doesn't necessarily produce a group that is also anti-Black, or for that matter, anti-racist. Sometimes the word diversity becomes a code word. In its most extreme form, it can mean anyone except African Americans. So I don't know how it happens at ESSIE. The colleges of engineering traditionally, in the years that I've been here, have been one of the 3 colleges that had the highest enrollment, Black enrollment in the student body. The law school also used to be one of those, but we've fallen down from our throne, so we're no longer that. So I will speak to the law school experience because today we have the most diverse student body that we've ever had at the law school, but we have very few African-American students. So I hope as you go forward with whatever your initiatives will be, you'll keep in mind that being anti-racist is something completely different from generally supporting diversity or inclusion. And I'll leave that to you all to work out what that will mean for your group. So in preparing for the talk, I had a number of exchanges with Professor Pravat. If I'm not mispronouncing that, I'm famous for ruining someone's name, even in my own family. And 10 minutes with me and everybody has a new name, and that's the way it is. You're gonna have to roll with it. So he's been trying to help me understand what civil engineers do. And being a good academic, of course, he referred me to multiple resources. And I was delighted to see that one of them was from the Guardian newspaper out of the UK, which is my favorite newspaper of all time. And I read it religiously every single day. Their coverage of what happens in the United States is far better than what our papers here can produce. So I did read that Guardian piece quite thoroughly to make sure I understood what civil engineering is all about. And initially I thought, well, I'll try to tailor my talk, particularly for the specialties that you guys have in your department. And when I say you guys, I'm not excluding women. That's just my New York talking. Everyone is you guys. So I'm too old to fix it right now, but I'm just explaining to you, I'm talking about everybody. But when I thought further about that, I said to myself, well, I'm not an engineer, right? I don't speak your languages. And I know that when non-lawyers come to the law school to speak about law, we all get salty. Because we're sitting there thinking, what is this person talking about? And why are they talking to us when they don't even know what we do? So I decided I'm not gonna talk about the specialties that you have. Because I'm not an engineer, right? And I'll let you in on a little secret. I was married to an engineer, an aerospace engineer for many, many years. And you know what? I still don't know what he did. I just know that there was graph paper in the house all the time, and he had these little implements that he would measure stuff with. That's all I know. So I figured that's what engineers do. So I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to talk to you about that. But what I can do is share with you how the work of civil engineers contribute to reinforce systems of inequality and prop up institutional racism. So I'm not a big PowerPoint person, but with Zoom, you know, you got to give a person a break from staring at the face of the person who's speaking. So I did create 10 slides for you guys, and I'm going to go through that, and hopefully at the end, you'll have some questions, and we'll have a robust discussion about my view of how engineers aid the oppression of Black people. So people who are not lawyers, or not lawyers who are in the criminal justice system, often ask, well, you know, I'm not a public defender, I'm not a prosecutor, I don't work for the police. I don't know how I can help fix all of the things that we're seeing in society today. I don't know anything about criminal justice. And even lawyers who do civil practice will come to us and say, I don't know anything about criminal justice, how can I help? And I want to abuse you of the notion that the problem starts with the criminal justice system. And I want you to think about other places where the problem can start. Because really, when we're talking about systems of inequality, we're talking about layering inequality so that it impacts every aspect of life that you may engage in. And I'm going to give you just 4 examples of how that will create a network of inequality that becomes overwhelming for the persons who are experiencing it. So let's start with housing policies. As most of you know, where we live is very important in determining what kind of benefits we're going to have access to. So for Black people, we have to think about, did they live in a neighborhood that had been redlined? Redline was a process where the banks used to take a red pen and draw a red circle in a particular area. And any housing that Black people wanted, if they needed a mortgage, they could only get a mortgage within the red circle. If there was any housing that they wanted outside of the red circle, the banks would not give the mortgage because it would indicate that they were trying to move into a neighborhood that was predominantly white. So the banking industry itself created segregated housing, or added to the housing that was already segregated. And then they had to deal with restrictive covenants, which were legal agreements that kept an individual homeowner from selling his or her property to a person of color. And back in those days, particularly a Black person, right? So there are all those conditions that were placed around even just the ability to get housing. Now, are you also in an area where zoning has impacted how many people can live in a house, or whether you can even have a house that's that has a multiple number of residents in it? Or are you in an area where the zoning is such that they've created the requirement of having vast lots in order for you to be able to build a house, which will minimize the number of people who live in a neighborhood and sort of automatically keep out people who are not ultra rich? So these are all the issues that can impact housing and the selection of housing when you're a Black person. So we also know that where you live will determine where your kids go to school, right? So are your kids going to be able to go to school in a neighborhood school that is adequately resourced by the state? Is your school funded primarily by property taxes, such that the richer communities have schools that are better because they're more fully funded, as opposed to low and moderate income communities who don't get as much money to keep their schools funded, and therefore their children, who are just as smart as the kids who go to the schools in the more wealthy neighborhoods, but are going to have a less attractive or less fulfilled experience in school because they have fewer resources to share with the student population. And of course, if you have fewer resources in the school that you're attending or the school your kids are attending, that means they're going to have fewer resources that will prepare them to go to the next level of education, perhaps college. And if they don't go to college or they can't get into a competitive college like UF, that's going to ultimately impact how they get a job, right? So we know from the data that if you take two similarly situated job applicants, one Black and one white, they have the same credentials, the white applicant is going to be favored over the Black applicant multiple times over. They've even been able to break that down by what your name sounds like, right? So I hope some of you have seen those studies. If your name sounds Black, you're not going to get a call back for the job. But if you tweak your resume and have your name so that it doesn't appear to be Black, then that very same person will get called back for an interview. And so, again, we're seeing the layering of it. Where did you live determines where you went to school. Where you went to school determines whether you can get a job or what kind of job you can get. Black professionals are chronically underemployed, meaning they work at jobs that require less credentials than the credentials that they actually have, right? We have chronic unemployment in the communities, meaning you can't get a job, period. And for those of you who don't know it, when you're looking at the unemployment statistics, you should know that unemployment statistics don't include everyone who's unemployed. They only include the people who are currently unemployed, but if you're unemployed for a certain period of time, you get dropped out of the unemployment statistics, so you don't reflect in it anymore. You're deemed to be permanently or chronically unemployable, and so you don't count, all right? So these things happen. So you're living in a community where you can't get great housing, there's discrimination in school policies, you have a hard time getting a job that's commensurate with your experience and qualifications, and all of that leads to poor health outcomes. African-American males in the United States have a death rate that is similar to developing countries, which is crazy, right? But again, it's all tied in, and we see this as part of the COVID pandemic. How much healthcare you get depends on how much money you make, right? We're not in a country where there's universal healthcare, so people may not be able to afford healthcare. We have racism in the delivery of healthcare, and that has been a problem at UF, at Shands Hospital, throughout Florida, and in general throughout the United States. White doctors don't deliver the same quality of care to Black patients. It's well documented now. It shows Black maternal mortality rates are higher, Black infant mortality rates are higher, and Black people die from curable diseases at a higher rate than whites do. So all of these factors combine to create stressors in a Black community. And of course, when you have stressors in the community, bad things start to happen in the community. And we know that when bad things start to happen in the community, it generates a police response, right? And so actually, the criminal justice system is the last step in the process of layered systematic inequality. So my point in that is to tell you that there are so many points above the criminal justice system where you can intervene and help to create a more just society. You don't have to wait until someone is killed by the police in order to figure out how you fit in. So what I did was I took one layer, it's the housing, and I'm gonna throw civil engineering into that to see how the policies that civil engineers have participated in have caused destruction and discrimination within Black communities. And when I say housing, I'm not talking about just building a house. I mean, I'm including that as well, but I'm talking about housing, you know, written big. How do we select a location where housing will be developed? How do we select where a community will be developed? What kinds of things do we look at? Is the site in a flood zone, for example? Is it in a tornado alley? You know, every spring we get the news reports out of the Midwest where just dozens of trailer parks and mobile homes have been damaged by these horrible tornadoes that come every year through through the Midwest because it's a tornado alley. I remember my grandmother lived in Ohio, and she had a basement that if there was a tornado warning, everybody had to run into the basement. I mean, that's the life out there. So we have to consider that. I say we, I'm talking about you. You know, so civil engineers have to consider that. Is this community going to be situated in the tornado alley? Are there toxic substances on the site where the community will be situated or nearby, so that we have to worry about toxic substances leaching into their water? These are all the things that you have to consider. And then we have to think about costs. How much will it cost to protect the community against the risks that we have identified in the area? So the photo that you see on the screen is the lower 9th Ward of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And as you all know, they suffered a massive break in the levee that protected the lower 9th Ward and the rest of the city from rising flood waters. Now, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I believe the Army Corps of Engineers was responsible for building that levee, although I'm not 100% sure on that. And so one of the things I would wonder is, when they built the dam, the levee, what factors were they considering in terms of who was going to be living on the other side of it? Did they consider that the people on the other side were going to be low income, primarily Black people? And what would that mean in terms of their abilities to survive in the environment should the levee fail? Did they do all they could to shore up the levee? Or was there a cost factor where cost compared to who was going to be living on the other side was considered? So I don't know any of the engineers who participated in that project. I know that today, the levee has been rebuilt in a different way to help provide better protection for those people who came back and rebuilt their homes in the 9th Ward. Now, after a site is selected, you then have to start thinking about, okay, well, what structures are we going to place on that site? And what's required to make those structures safe and sound? What kind of rebar or beams are going to be created in order to build our structures? And how will our structures be covered? How will the framework of those structures be covered? Will they be durable, right? Is this going to be a structure that will only last for 10 years, or will it last for 110 years? I just moved out of an apartment building here in DC that was built in 1920. It still has the original framework that was put up in 1920. It still has the subway tiles on the floor and the marble staircase from 1920. It was built to be durable. On the other hand, we can look at some of these buildings that are being thrown up in areas that are being regentrified or gentrified, where they're just moving poor people out and throwing up quote unquote luxury apartment buildings. And you stand in the building and the subway runs underneath it and the whole building shakes. Right? You can sort of get the sense that this maybe won't be durable. Maybe in 120 years it won't still be there. But nonetheless, these are questions that the engineer will have to ask. And then of course you got to figure out how much is all that going to cost, because it's not like every project has an unlimited source of money. You've got to build what you can build within the budget that you have. So the picture that you're looking at now is the Grenfell Towers building in London, which, as you can see, it's burning at the moment. There's I don't know if you can quite see it in the corner, but there's a fireman's ladder and they're putting water on the building. The Grenfell Towers building caught fire in 2017 and 72 people died in that fire. Now, the fire started in someone's apartment, but it spread through the whole building because the building was clad in a material that was flammable. And the sad fact was, everyone knew at the time the cladding was placed on the building that it was not good. The engineers knew it, the government knew it, but the government made the decision that they would go with the flammable cladding because it was less expensive. It was cheaper. And who was going to live in the building anyway? It's primarily brown and Black immigrants and poor white British. So the government didn't want to spend a whole lot of money to create housing for the people in Grenfell Tower. And 72 people died as a result of that. Right now, today in 2020, there are multiple buildings in London, in the poorer ends of town, that still have that same cladding on them, right? And so you wonder, what are the engineers thinking about that? What was the discussion? What did the discussion sound like when the government official told the engineering team, no, we're gonna put this flammable cladding on because it's cheaper? What kind of conversation did the engineers have at that time to alert the government to the risk possibilities that people could actually die because a poor choice was being made on how to complete the structure itself? So that's a question I would have. Something for engineers to think about. So I have 2 slides on roads, actually. Yeah, so, you know, lawyers are so funny. Who would think this would be interesting stuff? You know, but actually, when you think about it, it is kind of interesting because engineers design and build roads. We all know that. And so, but how does that impact structural inequality? And so the photo that I'm showing you here is an example of how it does. What you're looking at is a community that used to be a viable economic community in Baltimore, Maryland. And in the age of urban renovation, urban renewal, and all that kind of stuff, throughout the country, many highways and bypasses were built straight through viable Black communities. And what it did was it destroyed the community, right? So in this picture, you're looking at a community in Baltimore where the businesses were on one side of the retaining wall for the highway, and the people who lived in the community were on the other side. So when this overpass was created, it cut the community off from its economic base, and it destroyed the livelihood of the community. To this day, this particular area of Baltimore has not recovered from the destruction of their economic center. Now, if you know New York City at all, if any of you have ever driven up there, you've had the misfortune of being on the Cross Bronx Expressway. This is another example of a highway that was used to destroy a community. It was authorized by a guy named Robert Moses, who you may know that name. He was a politician up in New York, but more importantly, he became responsible for the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which built many of the bridges and tunnels in New York City, not the Port Authority ones, but the other toll bridges. And in order to do that, he systematically destroyed Black communities. So the Cross Bronx Expressway ran straight through a huge Black and Latino community that was strong and viable. And today it looks like a war zone because the community could never recover from the way the Cross Bronx Expressway, the highway, destroyed the coherence of their community. Now, we have several examples of that in Florida as well. The town of Overton, Florida, was also destroyed by building an overpass through it. And that's an issue that continues to be problematic down in that part of Florida. I put a little headline from a newspaper in 2018 from Bradenton, which is, if my memory serves me right, is on the west coast of Florida. And they were fighting, there was a plan to put a highway through the historic Black community in Bradenton. And so the community got together and they were trying to fight to prevent that from happening. The other 2 headlines are from 2 articles. The top one is from a Washington Post issue, 2016, that looked at the way the builders in the 50s and 60s drove these highways through poor Black communities and disrupted the entire economic development of those communities. The last one is an article from The Atlantic, 2016, and it talks about the role that the placement of highways had in creating poverty in Black urban areas, right? And the subcaption on the title I have there, it says, they seem like such a good idea in the 50s, and they're talking about highways. The highways are the they. So we have to think about that. What was happening in the United States in the 50s? We still had Jim Crow segregation, where Black people were restricted to areas where they could live. We still had no universal voting for Black people, so their civic voices could not be heard, and their opinions were not represented in the decisions that impacted even their own communities. So, you know, when you hear expressions like that, you have to think about what was happening in the 50s. In the 50s, we're trying to create these ways for white commuters to get to the suburbs, right? As the suburbs were being developed to get people out of the cities. And so these structures that at the same time as they were aiding the white commuter to get more quickly to the suburbs and more efficiently, it was destroying the Black communities that existed in those places that became inconvenient for the transportation of white commuters. It's engineers that help plan that, right? It's engineers that help plan that. The last slide actually is a different aspect of building the infrastructure for roads for a community that's going to be developed. All communities need roads, but the question is, who are the roads designed for? And we know environmentally this is an issue now, as people are becoming clearer and clearer that the roads are being designed only for the people who have cars, right? It's not like they're being developed for the community at large, but it's for the convenience of people who have cars. So have the engineers developed a system where you must have a car to get from one place to another. This also became a factor in the number of deaths in Hurricane Katrina, because many of the people who remained and did not evacuate during the hurricane, or when the warnings went out for the hurricane, was because they didn't have cars. So they couldn't access the roads to evacuate. And because they were lower income, they didn't have the extra money to buy transportation out of New Orleans so that they could evacuate, you see? And this all has to do with how we planned out, the engineers, how the engineers planned out the infrastructure, how to get in and out of New Orleans and what to do in those situations. The picture that you're looking at on this slide is the evacuation route for Houston, Texas, when Hurricane Rita struck. So as you can see, it didn't work very well. People were stuck on the evacuation route for 14 hours. And most people had only moved a mile or two in 14 hours. Now, it doesn't even take into account that some people probably didn't have access to the highway because there weren't any entrance or exit ramps in the neighborhoods where they lived. So these are issues that engineers should be thinking about too. How are you contributing to isolating Black communities so that they don't have access to transportation? I don't know if you know the project, but there's a project called the 1619 Project that the New York Times put out. And it's a retelling of aspects of American history through the lens of Black and other oppressed people who have experienced American history. So I was having my class read that, and I was glancing through it myself because it's a fabulous piece of work. And there's an article there, they're small articles that are all written by different scholars. So there's an article there in the 1619 Project about the traffic jams in Atlanta. So I know most people in Gainesville have been to Atlanta. You've driven to Atlanta to get relief from Gainesville. But if you've ever driven to Atlanta, you know that the traffic in Atlanta is horrific. You can't get through Atlanta in less than 2 hours. It's not possible because the traffic, no matter what time of the day or night, you can try at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's still gonna be 2 hours. And in this 1619 section, they explained why the traffic in Atlanta is like that. And it has to do with the highways, right? Because the greater white communities that surrounded the Black central part of Atlanta did not want people to be able to drive from the central part of Atlanta and to be able to get easily into their neighborhoods. And so they've created this labyrinth complex array of road work that isolates their neighborhood, so you can get to it if you know the secret way, right? But if you're just driving up and down the highway, you can't easily get into their neighborhoods. And if you've ever missed your turn in Atlanta, you know that it takes you 45 minutes to get back to where you should be, because they have this little complex internet of roadways to make sure that the Black people at the heart of Atlanta don't easily get into the predominantly white communities. It's a fascinating thing. Whoever thought that a traffic jam would have to do with racism? But here's a perfect example of how engineers were used to make sure that a Black population didn't disrupt the peace of a predominantly white environment. So I encourage you as engineers to look at the 1619 project, even if you don't want to read the whole thing. Read that piece about the traffic jam in Atlanta, because I think you'll find it interesting. All right, so I think you sort of get the idea of where I'm going. And if you're as old as me or older than my kids, you know that there used to be a sitcom where there was a character, I think his name was Urkel. And he was a nerdy kind of kid, really smart, but just completely a nerd. And everything he touched, he was like a walking disaster on 2 feet, right? Everything he touched turned into a catastrophe. And at the end of it, he would say, yikes, did I do that? You know, so as engineers, that's the reaction I want you to have at this moment. I want you to say, wow, did we participate in that? Yes, you did. You did. Not you individually, you know, I'm talking about you as your profession. You did participate in that. Now, it probably might not have been knowingly, and maybe in some cases it was knowingly, but I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to think that engineers are kind of like lawyers. We look at our project that's right in front of us at the moment, right? What sentence are we going to construct for this bill that we're working on right now? We're not looking at it in the context of the 10 bills that were decided yesterday. We're just looking at it right now, this piece that we're working on right now. And I think engineers probably do that too. You're working on this one project right now, and you're not looking at it to see how this one project fits into the overall, the global work that's already been done, and how this particular piece might be aggravating something at a point, at another point along the spectrum. So what can you do about that? I'm winding up now, right? So I know that like lawyers, like law professors, some of us actually still have a finger in practice, and some of us just teach. But no matter whether you're teaching and practicing, or whether you're just teaching, there are things that you can do as civil engineers to actually contribute to moving the social justice needle forward. So if you're in practice, right, follow those canons of ethics that were shared with me. I said the bookend ones because that's what they look like to me. It happens to be number 1 and number 8, right? But in your canon of ethics, it says engineers should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, and shall strive to comply with principles of sustainable development in the performance of their professional duties. Okay, well, wow, that's a gift on a plate. Right? It's telling you as part of your professional obligations, you should already be thinking about these things, right? Engineers should recognize that lives, safety, health, and welfare of the general public are dependent upon engineering judgments, decisions, and practices incorporated into structures, machines, products, processes, and devices. So think about that Grenfell Tower situation. Were the civil engineers thinking about the health, safety, and welfare of the general public when they're making that decision to go with the government's decision to put cheaper rather than safer cladding on the building? So use your canons. Canon number 8, the last one, you should engage in all matters related to their profession, treat all persons fairly, and encourage equitable participation without regard to gender, gender identity, race. You can tell this is recently renewed language, because that kind of language wouldn't have been available when your principles were first developed. You should not discriminate or harass people in connection with your professional activities. Engineers shall consider the diversity of the community and shall endeavor in good faith to include diverse perspectives in the planning and performance of their professional services. And you know, all of the professions are weak in this particular regard. We have nice language that asks us to do that, but we don't always comply with it. And I know for us in law, we're the worst out of all of the professions in terms of meeting those obligations. But if you want to go forward with social justice, you have the backbone in your own canons of ethics that give you cover with your clients and with the public in order to do that. You can educate your clients, and I know that's difficult. We have that problem in law too. Our clients pay us to give them advice, and then they don't take a single word of advice we give them, and then come to us when they've created a mess for us to unravel. And I'm sure something similar to that might be happening with engineers, but you know, you still have to try. You still have to try. You still have to tell your client, I know that you're trying to accomplish X, and I'm going to help you accomplish X. But perhaps we can do it this way, as opposed to the way you're proposing, because the way you're proposing is going to do violence on some group or some community. And we should try to avoid that if we can. Your clients might not appreciate it, but if they really like your services and your skill, they're going to keep you. They just won't follow your advice, but you should try to give it anyway. And of course, you should think and work holistically, right? Don't just look at this one rebar. Don't just look at the one building, but how does it fit in the entire environment, the entire community that's going to be impacted by the one particular building? For us in the academy, it's much easier, right? It's so much easier because we have the ability to do things that, you know, time and money constrain you in practice. But in the academy, we can get out, we can meet the public. We can go to community group meetings, we can talk to people, we can introduce ourselves, we can share our research. Of course, you don't want to share anything that's proprietary, but there's lots of stuff that we do that would be helpful to the community if they knew it. And I think for you all in engineering, it's much easier today than it would have been to find groups that are actually interested. Hurricane Katrina really shed a bit of light on the whole environmental justice process. And now we have grassroots groups everywhere on every aspect of the work that you all do who would be interested in hearing from you and knowing you and having access to some of your work. And of course, finally, you should collaborate. Not just with the social justice grassroots movements, but with other colleagues through other disciplines who do that kind of work. I know we have a number of law-related groups that are following the issue of citing of different projects, of looking at the construction issues like what happened in Grenfell Towers, who look, of course, as you know, who look at the environmental issues as well. So the opportunities for collaboration, I think, are greater than they've ever been, at least in the time that I've been teaching. And I think if you guys want to, there's room there for you to use your expertise in a way that would be helpful to the community. This is my last slide. I started out by saying you could be anti-racist, you could be anti-racist teachers, students, activists, if you wanted to. But not everybody wants to. And that's okay too, right? Because the idea about being anti-racist or trying to do something that will push our society forward in a more just way has to come from inside. It can't be imposed upon anyone. So you either want to do it or you don't, or you're open to the possibility of growing in your understanding to see why it might be important to do it. So I'm going to help those people who might be open to the possibility of growing. And I'm going to appeal to your pocket. Because there's one thing for certain, change is coming. It's not coming as fast as I would like it, because of course I would have liked it to come yesterday. But it is coming. We may not be able to calculate exactly when it's going to come, but the process of change has already happened. And so not only is the process changing, our clients are changing, our communities are changing, and sooner or later, that's going to catch up with you in a financial way if you're not on board with change. So this last little image I'm giving you is a news coverage of a bill that was just passed this July in New Jersey. It's being called the Holy Grail of environmental justice. And I'm just gonna share a little bit with you about the bill because it's the first of its kind in the country. It requires the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to deny a permit for power plants, incinerators, landfills, large recycling facilities, and sewage treatment plants in certain minority and impoverished neighborhoods, right? If those projects pose health and environmental risks on top of risks that the community already encounters, the plan must be denied. That's amazing, right? And they say the purpose of the bill was to draw a line in the sand and to let people know that if you want to build something in a minority or impoverished community, you've got to evaluate the stressors that that community is already experiencing and compare it to the stressors that other communities are experiencing. So the goal of the bill was to establish a principle that if the project is not permissible in an affluent community, then it's not permissible anywhere else. Wow, that's a completely new way of thinking about citing locations, right? Because not in my backyard is usually the language of the affluent communities. And in New Jersey, they're saying, if it's not good in your backyard, why should a minority community have to bear the burden of providing access to some kind of infrastructure that's going to kill their community? We're not going to permit that any longer in New Jersey. Change is coming. And it's coming across all professions. Institutional investors are now going to money managers and saying, what does your firm look like? How diverse is it? How diverse are your investments? Who are you investing my money with, right? And if you want to continue to be able to invest my money because you're making money off of my money, right? That's how that works. I've got to see some change in the structure of your organization. We have institutional corporate clients that are coming to law firms now and saying, how many Black partners and associates do you have? Do you have any? And for the ones you have, are you giving them significant work that allows them to develop into being rainmakers, which is important in our field, right? And if they don't, the institutional client is saying, well, you know what? Maybe we're gonna have to take our corporate business somewhere else that actually values those words that you guys are using, diversity and inclusion. So change is coming. And the question that I would put to you all as civil engineers is, do you want to be part of making that change? Or do you just want to be dragged along behind those who have made the change? And that's a decision I think you all are facing now. And I hope the issues that you're going to be talking about in your series will help you feel out, given your values, feel out where are you going to fit? Are you going to be part of the change, or are you going to be dragged along by the change? So I'll end there, and I'll just wish you the best of luck in putting meaning to your words and in enjoying and profiting from the conversations that you have amongst yourselves. So I hope that wasn't too long and that we have enough time for questions, and I hope people have questions, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Jacobs. All right, everyone. Yes, we do hope that you can stay with us for some questions.
Yes, sure.
Dr. Pravat is going to moderate, but while he's getting organized there, I'll just say we had a bunch of questions in the chat. If you are online here and you'd like to ask your question directly to Professor Jacobs, you go ahead and use the reaction symbol and I'll unmute you. Dr. Wu, if you don't mind, you want to get us started. Find you. There's a lot of people on. We almost have 100 folks, so I'm having a hard time.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'm telling you, if it was the law school on a Friday, there'd be 2 people on. 2 people in the group.
Okay, Sue, I see you don't have your audio connected, so that's fine. So let me start with a
Okay,
question.
let me, perhaps I could start with one. Professor Jacobs, thank you so much. You have presented us with a view of ourselves that, it just made me, it gives me chills that you were able within a short time to dig into it that much. But let's take it back. You have been here about twice as long as I have been at the University of Florida. And one of the things someone asked was, you commented that UF has been saying a lot about addressing racism and about combating it, but not much has been done. I frame that as, we have constantly been doing one step forward and two steps to the back
Yes,
or two steps to the side.
yes.
So uh, when we think about University of Florida, our community, what would you suggest that University of Florida should be doing now to combat this anti-Black systemic racism, as well as UF and maybe in the Gainesville broader community?
So one of the problems, of course, when an institution as large as the University of Florida has actually participated in creating those structures of inequality, is that they have to be willing to do self-examination and acknowledge and admit that they sustain those systems of inequality. And the university has never been willing to do that. For those of you who are too young to know it or came to Florida after I did, when I got here, I had never been to Florida. I think I took my kids to Disney World once, but that's not really Florida. That's a made up place. When I got down here, I was really stunned in 1993 by how much we were still part of what was considered the Old South.
Right.
Honestly, in 1993, it wouldn't have surprised me to see a Black person walking down Fifth Avenue on the Northeast side with a chain around their neck. That's really how it was. And you all may not know that Florida helped organize the Southern states to resist the implementation of Brown versus Board of Ed. This period of time was called the period of massive resistance. And what that meant was the Southern states decided that the Supreme Court wasn't going to force them to integrate. And so Florida pretty much led that. In fact, the year after Brown, the gubernatorial election in Florida was based on who would oppose the Supreme Court the strongest, right? Wow. And the names on the buildings on main campus, particularly the O'Connell Center and the football stadium, these are people who were part of the Southern segregationists who actually wrote letters when the first Black student was, when the Supreme Court said the first Black student had to be admitted to the US Law School. Those alum wrote letters in saying that they would never contribute another dime to the University of Florida if they admitted a Black student, right? That person's name is on our rare book room at the law school, right? So the messaging is bad because the university can't get to the place where they acknowledge how they participate in institutional racism. Let's look at people who ride bicycles on campus. If you're a little Black kid from Northeast and you ride your bike on campus, the campus police are gonna stop you. They're gonna ask you for ID and they're gonna issue a trespass warning so that the next time you come on campus with your bike, they can arrest you. But the white kids from Northwest bike on campus all the time and no one stops them because there's a presumption that they belong there because they're white. And the university refuses to address that issue, right? If you read last week's Alligator, was it last week? When was the confusion over? I think it was last week or the week before. There was an article in the Alligator about the experiences of Black faculty on campus. And one of the most telling experiences was that last year, many of you may not know this, a gunman came into African American Studies department. And this is after the Parkland shooting. A gunman came into the African American Studies department and was menacing the staff and the faculty in the department. They called UPD UPD arrived and stayed outside the building. They didn't enter the building and help the faculty and staff in African American studies. So, you know, they're on the phone with UPD to help us. And UPD said, try to run outside. We can help you when you get outside. That speaks volumes about where the university is with regard to their commitment to their Black students, their Black faculty, right? Commitment is demonstrated with deeds and backed up with money. And we've never been in a period of time where UF would sustain commitment at that level. So that's my piece on that.
Cool. Here, so we have a question here about the water, wastewater treatment plants. You did mention the citing that was a very interesting piece about the New Jersey legislation. How do they impact communities differently? You know, have you seen or heard things? I suppose that the most recent thing has been the Flint, Michigan suggestion.
Right.
What would you say to, again, this is probably more for us, is what can that individual engineer do who's working for his consultant and he's getting his direction from his partner who is working, being employed by, you know, state of Michigan? What is my role in that whole business and practice of engineering?
So we face that problem as lawyers too, right? You get a client, the client wants to do something, and you know as a lawyer, it's bad, right? It's bad. It's gonna hurt people. Now, you are being retained by the client, so to the extent possible, you want to help the client achieve whatever his or her goals are. But here's where it comes down to ethics, I think, at least for me personally. If I have a client who I believe is doing damage or is going to do a damage and is planning to do damage to the community that I care about, you know, I have to have a serious conversation with that client. And if they're insistent on pursuing this course of action, then I must make an ethical decision. Where do I sit as a professional? Am I willing to stand up for my beliefs and perhaps lose a fee and tell the client, you need to get a new lawyer? Or will I cast my values aside and go ahead and help the client do something that I know is going to endanger my community? And frankly, you know, I've been fortunate as a lawyer. I had my own firm. I did that intentionally because I wanted to be able to position myself to make those kinds of choices. So even in the criminal law context, if I had, for example, this was my policy when I was in practice, I would represent a juvenile client who hurt the community one time. Right? I'm going to give you the benefit of a doubt that you exercise poor judgment, that you're capable of learning, and that you realize hitting that old lady over the head and taking her pocketbook when she got a Social Security check is bad. So I'm going to help you. I'm going to make sure the state does everything that it's constitutionally required to do if they want to deprive you of liberty, and hopefully we'll win because I'm good like that. But I'm telling you now, and I'm telling your parents, while you're sitting here, I will never represent you again if you continue to harm our community, right? And I've done that. And I've actually had juvenile clients come back and their parents are like, you did such a good job last time. Can you represent little Johnny now? And I'm like, no. Give your money to somebody else because little Johnny doesn't respect my community. And so I can't represent him. That's a personal choice that I make based on my ethical sense of who I am as a lawyer. I wonder whether the engineers who were involved in that Grenfell Towers debacle did any kind of evaluation like that, or did they just accept the fact that these poor people were going to have cheaper and more risky cladding on their building, right? I would hope that the engineers, at least one or two who were involved in that project, would have said, I have to disassociate myself with this project because it's dangerous. Hey, and then if there's litigation, you can make money because you can be an expert witness for the other side. That's what I look at. The money still comes, so you're good.
Right. So, you know, this is something that I got from one of my mentors when I was back in Trinidad, that he would prefer that his family, and he had one son, wife and family would starve than to do something that went against his professional reputation. Your reputation is the highest and most sacred part of what we have as professionals, and
Absolutely.
nothing should come in the way of that. You know, the other thing that you mentioned, and I'm going to be brief because we're probably well over time, but we talked about collaboration. And to me, changing the University of Florida, changing our culture, we do need to get out of our silos. I am so tired of doing another engineering test. Oops, did I say that on a recorded line? But there is so many bigger issues to actually do.
Yes.
So I would probably encourage us, our faculty, our students, about those collaborations. And what would you suggest of, you know, taking these two colleges side by side and finding, you know, finding that synergy to actually collaborate?
Yeah.
You know,
So
Professor Hatfield is going to want us to get money and research, and we have to, you know, we have to do the normal paper chase.
right. And so, and there are other actual institutional barriers that the university has to
Mhm.
collaboration. And we learned this at the law school a couple of years ago when we were trying to put together a project with another college. There's all kinds of ways that the university counts money, courses, this and that. So at one point it became difficult even for other students outside of the College of Law to participate in courses that we designed to be multidisciplinary, because the university restrictions on how money was distributed prohibited that, or I'll say it inhibited that, right? So, so one of the things, getting back to your question about the university, one of the things that the university can do, right, is look at its own systems and see where it prevents people from engaging in collaborative work. We do, currently at the law school, we're involved in a collaborative project with, I've forgotten now, I'm sorry, which department, which engineering department it is. But we're the faculty member there put together an interdisciplinary team to look at some research they're doing about using AI and micro devices to deliver a treatment. So he now has an ethicist on board on the project. He has 2 or 3 different people from the law school. Me from the how are we going to limit the government's access to this information. We have one of our IP professors who's working on how do you protect intellectual property. You know, so there's all kinds of collaborations possible, and we're all listed on a grant that particular engineering department is doing to get this project off the ground. So, but I don't want you just to think about restricting collaboration to UF, right? Because there are fantastic academics throughout the country who are working on really good, innovative projects, and maybe they don't have a strong college of engineering where they are. You know what I mean? So I think it would be helpful. One of the things I think would be helpful is to create a directory of people, of academics who are working on social justice projects and who are looking for collaborators. So I think that would be a good idea. And then we wouldn't be restricted by the weird, you know, Gainesville is what it is, which is why I'm not there at the moment. But, you know, our minds are not bound by the incorporated limits of Gainesville.
Right.
Right? And particularly now we know with Zoom, even though no one in the world wants to do another Zoom call, we know that if we have to reach out beyond the territorial boundaries of Gainesville, we can do that, and we can get good work done with people who are not at UF. To me, that's truly interdisciplinary.
Okay. So let me see if I could get one voice in here. Randy Swit raised his hand. If Randy, Dave, can you unmute Randy? And he can ask his question.
Yeah, I'm here. So, Dr. Jacobs,
Yes,
the
we use professor.
Professor Jacobs.
Yeah,
Very
we
good.
think it's presumptuous to call ourselves doctors.
That's fine. The one thing I kind of brought up, and one thing that has interested me, especially as engineers and scientists, and here I can throw my video on, that's fine. As engineers and scientists, because we're all kind of very algorithm based.
Yes.
And I was listening to a while back a podcast that featured a data scientist who had some very interesting views. And one of the things that she pointed out is that as engineers and scientists, we look at algorithms and the math and everything in there, is that these are very agnostic and they're, you know, very neutral. So we can trust in them because they're all, you know, evidence-based and math-based. And she had what I found kind of a shocking and original approach to that. She said, and as we've seen borne out, and I don't know which one came first, was her approach on this, was that we're kind of fooling ourselves that the algorithms are neutral, that the algorithms are truly agnostic. And because, you know, our biases get built into them, or they're based on data that was originally biased in the first place.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times that tends to, and I want to apologize, I came in late because I had a class,
Okay.
so I didn't hear a lot of what was there before. But, and I think that we tend to overlook that because we think, oh, math is pure, you know, the algorithms are pure. And I don't know if there's a lot of oversight or thought put into, well, hey, is this algorithm I'm using actually reinforcing biases, pre-existing biases that occurred? I mean, we talk about things like, I think it was Facebook doing the face recognition, was it Google? I think it was Google that was doing the facial recognition. And because their original data set was bad, it was had a very poor success rate on African-American faces.
Right.
And things like that. I don't know how to raise awareness and get people to think of that more.
So this is an issue that computer scientists are now aware of. It was raised a couple of years ago by a young woman who was getting her PhD at MIT, I think. And one of the projects they were working with was with a robot. And you had to train the robot, right, to have a certain reaction when it saw a human face. And what she realized is that she could never get her robot to have the required reaction. So she thought about it for a while. She tried all kinds of crazy things, and the robot would not react to her the way it was reacting to the other students in the class. So finally, they blew up a picture of one of her white classmates, and she held it over her face when she interacted with the robot, and it gave the required response. It didn't recognize her as a human because the data set that was used to train the robot didn't include any Black faces in it. Okay, so she wrote a really interesting article about that. And I meant to say this, I'll just throw this in here now. There's a Massachusetts Institute of Technology puts out a magazine called Technology Today. You can get it digital or you can get the hard copy on it. And it's really a fantastic magazine. I've been reading it for oh my God, 12 years now probably. And they're just covering all the new stuff that's emerging in sciences across the board, all kinds of sciences. And so about 10 years ago, the ethicists started to say, you've got to stop this move fast and break everything because bad stuff is coming, right? And they were like, oh, you know, you're just raising red flags for no, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Well, last year, the entire issue was devoted to the ethicists, many of whom were the same ones that said, who were coming back to say, We tried to tell you, right, that this was bad. So for example, now we know that Facebook, that the genocide that's going on in Myanmar was organized on Facebook. Not only do we know that, but we know that the Zuckerberg people were notified of that in 2015 and chose to ignore it, right? Chose to ignore it. 700,000 people have been evicted from their homes and many thousands killed. That happened as a result of Facebook, right? Think about that dog that Boston Robotics has created, right? Everyone is excited. The dog can open doors. You know, yay, this is gonna be wonderful. The first thing I thought when I saw that was the police will buy that dog and they will use it to break into people's houses and track people down in the street. And what happens when the dog kills somebody? Who are we going to send to prison for that? Will we send the engineer who developed the dog? Will we get the computer programmer who programmed the dog? Somebody's going to have to go to prison, and who will that be? Right? But scientists don't think about that. They're just excited because they can do something. But the AI stuff is deadly, deadly. And all kinds of bad things are happening in my field because lawyers don't understand science to begin with. As I told you, I lived with an engineer and I still don't know what he does. But judges in particular don't understand science. So if we get a company that has a proprietary algorithm and they sell it to some law enforcement entity, and they say, use our algorithm, it proves X, Y, and Z. The police don't have the capability of evaluating whether that's accurate. And unlike in IP areas where you can actually challenge the proprietary information, in criminal law, we're not allowed to do so. So we don't actually have a way to contest the fact that this algorithm actually doesn't do what the commercial company that's selling it says it does, right? And who thinks about that when the code or the algorithm is being developed? Facebook and Google broke the Fair Housing Act, which was enacted in 1965, because their algorithm allowed people to screen people on the basis of race and gender for jobs. That's it, and for housing. That's against the law. It's against two separate pieces of civil rights legislation, right? So these are very serious issues. And now I think some engineering colleges and some computer science programs are actually requiring the students to take an ethics class so that they can start thinking about while they're learning, no, we can't just do this because it's fun to do and we can do it. We have to look at it holistically, as I said before. How does this impact society as a whole? The AI stuff is very scary and dangerous for not only privacy, but people's freedom. So I hope folks will take that more seriously. And I know on our side, on the law side, people are looking at that more seriously.
Okay.
I'm not pressed for time, so if you have questions, I'll take them.
Okay. So I think a lot of commentary has come in the chat, and we have been following up. I've dropped the Guardian article there. We have the New Jersey legislation there. You know, this is one of the things we do as engineers. We're on the ball. So thank you so much for pointing out these things. You know, we have gone over time by about 30 minutes.
Wow.
But to tell you the truth, this was so illuminating, and really it frames what we do. You know, Professor Jacobs, you have hit the nail on the head here. You know, we work for the benefits of society, and we have to adapt. We have to evolve as society chooses to evolve. And it is important for us to consider what a chore it would be if we were to be dragged kicking and screaming there, as opposed to leading. Right?
Yes,
we have the opportunity. You know, we want to be the lead dogs first. And that's why University of Florida, the Engineering School of Sustainable Infrastructure and Environment has decided we and our students will be the leaders that will change the world for the better. That's
Yeah,
what we're about.
I applaud that.
That's what we're going to do.
Yes.
So stay tuned, everyone. Next week, we will have class interactions with special guests and so on throughout Florida, the University of Florida in several classes, and that will be coming out over the weekend. Please join me now. Please join me with Professor Hatfield, Dean Abernathy, and Dr. David Kaplan to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
My mom done
Thank you so
told.
much for your support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. David, over to you.
Thank you, for Professor Jacobs. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad you finally got the opportunity to teach online. I'm so proud to be part of the community, to be supporting you, and we continue to do so. And I'll say for all the students out there, this might have been your chance to be reflective about your profession, but you can't stop there. It's time to be proactive.
Yes.
And change the community that you are in, and make it one that we can all be proud of. And that means doing the work, whether it's uncomfortable or not. And so
Right.
go out there and make the world a better place, like all of our heroes would want us to do.
And if you guys would stop partying down there in Florida, we could all get back on campus safely.
Oh,
So
please.
stop
Yes.
partying, wear
You
your
know-
masks, even though people don't want to. Put them on, it won't kill you. And then we can all get together in person and celebrate moving forward together.
Thank you so much, Professor Jacobs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone.
Bye.